How many of you here believe in faith? F-A-T-E. Show of hands. Now, for those of you who struggle with the concept of faith, I may have a story for you that could likely change your mind. The year was 1980, a time when the Ethio-Eritrean war was raging, and so young men from across the country were being recruited to be sent off to the battlefield. And unfortunately for my dad, he was among those chosen to join the army. Now this was obviously a devastating news for my dad, because that's not how he envisioned his life to turn out. Yes, it's an honor to serve your country, but at the same time, it's also a huge risk, because there's no guarantee that you could make it out alive. So my dad decided that he would go, obviously because there's no way out for him. He decided that he would go. And what made the situation all the more worse for him was the fact that at the time, my dad was recently engaged to his soon-to-be wife, my mom. And so these two had dreams of getting married and starting a family soon. But nevertheless, there was no way out for my dad, because he had to pack his bags, say goodbye to his beautiful bride, and head off to the military camp, not knowing if he'll ever see her again. Now, when my dad left the house, however, my mom handed him a small piece of paper. That small piece of paper was a prescription letter that he got from the doctor's office. You see, for the longest time, my dad has issues with his left eye. And so she thought if they knew that he had some sort of troubles with his eyesight, they would somehow return him back to her. I guess you can say that it was her desperate attempt to salvage the life that she thought she was going to have with him. Deep down, my dad also knew that he would have to go through some sort of medical checkup before they get admitted into the army. So he was quietly hoping that that small piece of paper would be his way out. Eventually, my dad arrived at the military camp, and to his surprise, there was no medical checkup, no medical exam, because as soon as him and the other young men arrived at the military camp, they were immediately instructed to begin their training. You see, at the time, the war between the two countries had reached a very critical stage, so the government wanted as many soldiers as possible battling at the front lines. So medically screening these young men was not given a priority whatsoever. After a rigorous fitness training that lasted 2 months, this group of young men were moved to a place called the Asab port, and from there they were moved to a place called Mizawa on a boat. At this point, my dad had completely given up hope on ever returning back home. He knew, just like his fellow comrades, that he was destined to come face to face with the enemy and fight for his life. Interestingly, however, even though he lost all hope, my dad still held on to that small piece of paper that my mom gave him when he left the house. Eventually, these newly trained soldiers finally arrived at Asmara, and they were stationed at a place called Adguadad. And before they finally get deployed to the battlefield, they all had to go through one last round of firearm training. There were around 3,000 troops, and so they had to be divided into small groups, and each group would have to take the training for a couple of days. A few groups went before my dad's group, and while my dad's group were patiently sitting and waiting for their turn, something unexpected happened. One particular day, a high-ranking army general decided to visit the troops, and while he was there, to check how the troops are doing and all operations at the camp, and while he was touring the camp, a group that went before my dad's group were making their way back to the camp. And as it is typical for troops, they were making all kinds of noises. They were singing, jumping up and down, and making all kinds of noises. And in that group, there was one particular young man that had his shirt open all the way. And coincidentally, that young man had scars all across his stomach. So the army general quickly notices that, and he calls him up to the front. He then proceeds to ask the young man what happened to him. And the young man replies that he had gone through an open surgery a few years prior. Feeling confused, the army general then asked him if he had been medically cleared to join the army. And the young man then reveals to the army general that neither him nor any of the other troops went through a proper medical checkup before they joined the army. As soon as he heard this, the army general immediately instructed all operations to be halted at the camp so that these troops would go through a proper medical checkup. However, the very interesting part of the story is that since the war was escalating at a really high rate, they couldn't afford to have all the soldiers go through a medical checkup. Each and every soldier could not go through a medical checkup. So instead, only those with visible physical injury and those who had proof of their medical past were given a priority. Now, out of the 3,000 soldiers, 200 were selected, and thanks to that small piece of paper that my mom gave to my dad, he ended up being one of them. A group of highly skilled doctors were then flown in from Addis, and then after going through a comprehensive medical checkup, my dad finally received his result. And the result officially declared him unfit for military. As soon as that happened, him and his fellow comrades who did not make the cut ended up being flown back to Addis. And due to this bizarre chain of events, my dad somehow found his way back into the loving embrace of the bride that he abandoned. Even though he must have felt relieved to have survived that ordeal, to have been given a second chance at life, I know my dad quietly carries the weight of despair. You see, after that devastating war had ended, my dad would go on to find out that most of the young men, and even the military general that went on a mission with him, had sadly perished. In fact, looking back at that time of his life, my dad always says to me that he still has a hard time trying to process how he was ever able to make it out alive. I guess you can say that it was the army general that saved my dad's life. Or maybe it was that young man that has his shirt open and had scars all across his stomach. Or maybe it was that small piece of paper that he held on to for so long. But I would simply say that it was a twist of fate that spared my dad's life. Contest chair.